Recently, I was possessed to buy this book, A History of Ghosts, Spirits, and the Supernatural. And in a shocking twist that only M. Night Shyamalan could have written, this book turned out to actually be quite good. It explains and debunks quite a lot of things. But there was one page in particular that really got my attention. Page 111, Noisy Ghosts, or as the Germans like to call them, Poltergeist. Did you know that the first ever report of a poltergeist comes from the year 94? Not 1994, 94. However, the term poltergeist was only first used in 1831. So I suppose at this time, to be a little more specific, it seems that this story is referring to a demon. But whatever, who really gives a shit? According to the Roman historian Flavius Flavor Flav Josephus, some guy named Eleazar found a root that could drive demons out of people. All he would do was hold the root up to the possessed person's nostrils, and the demon would just come out. That was pretty much it. No projectile vomiting, no 360-degree head spins, no your mother in hell. I will bleep that because that one was a bit vicious even for me. But yeah, Eleazar just held a root up to the person's nose, and the demon would just come out. Now, interestingly, after performing this excruciating exorcism, he would politely ask the demon, which was invisible of course, to knock over a cup of water on its way out so all the spectators could see that the demon had left the building, which the demon did. Everyone then would see nothing bump over a cup of water. Everyone then couldn't believe their eyes, and because they couldn't believe their eyes or explain what had happened, they instead chose to believe that Eleazar was legit, and then they gave him all their frankincense and myrrh. Amazing. But this does bring up an interesting question that I've asked once or twice on this channel before. If demons, ghosts, and poltergeist have been around for this long, why have they never been able to kill anybody yet? The answer to this question may be as simple as the perpetrator of the hoax did not wish to die. There's another story here from this book from the year 856, where a poltergeist is said to have haunted a German farmhouse and even made noises, started fires, and threw stones. Aren't they fucking lucky that it didn't throw knives? In another example, a guy named Gerald of Wales, a royal clerk to the king, describes a haunted house in the 12th century where the poltergeist threw handfuls of dirt at people. Aren't they fucking lucky that it didn't throw knives? And in another example, this book brings up the story of Old Jeffrey. Now, Old Jeffrey is the rather affectionate nickname given to the Epworth Rectory poltergeist, also known as the Wesley poltergeist and one of the best-known English poltergeists of all time. That said though, there could not have been any other poltergeist in England at the time then, because this story is absolutely pathetic. The Old Rectory was the home of the rector of Epworth from 1697 to 1735. The rector at this time was the Reverend Samuel Wesley, and he lived at this place with his wife Susanna and their 19 children. Moses. Now, something else important to note here is that in 1709, while the Wesleys were living there, a fire burnt down the wooden rectory, and it was then rebuilt in brick. Now, according to traditional ghost lore, construction and shit like this normally pisses the spirits off, but in this case, nothing happened until 1716, 7 long-ass boring years later. And since this was before the Ouija board was invented, what fucking excuse is there this time that a poltergeist just came out of nowhere? No one fucking died there, but what the fuck do I know? Now, according to people, I suppose, this haunting took place between December 1716 and January 1717. And the Wesleys were apparently plagued with a series of regularly occurring loud noises and knockings claimed to be caused by a poltergeist. Now, of course, again, at the time, the word poltergeist had not been coined yet, so I have no idea what kind of ghost the Wesleys thought that they were dealing with. Probably a demon. I mean, what other fucking explanation is there? Surely it could not have been the brand new house that was just built, just settling and making creaking noises, like how every other new house does. But no, the Epworth Rectory was different. The Epworth Rectory was special. Now, apparently, the Wesleys' fourth eldest daughter, Hetty, nicknamed the spirit Old Jeffrey, who is said to have made his presence known to all on Christmas Day 1716. In Mrs. Wesley's words, there was such a noise in the room over our heads as if several people were walking. What, like your 19 fucking children? There was running up and down the stairs, and we thought the children would be frightened. Well, rather they be frightened than thrown with knives. But poltergeists don't really like to do that. Now apparently, Mrs. Wesley and Mr. Wesley searched the whole house for the culprit, but couldn't find anyone anywhere. Except their 19 children. But since it couldn't have been the 19 children excited about Christmas Day or some shit like that, the only logical explanation that could explain why it sounded like there were several people walking in the room above was it must have been caused by old Jeffrey. Also apparently, while searching the house, the paranormal activity continued, rattling and thundering in every room, and even blowing an invisible horn at deafening decibels. Old Jeffrey then concluded his encore, left the building. I'm not sure if he knocked over a cup of water on his way out, but he never came back again. Now, I don't even know what the fuck to say about a story like this, but a guy named Addington Bruce pointed out that the original reports and records of this event reduced the haunting to nothing more than some alleged creaking noises, knocks, footsteps, or groaning sounds, in a house where, once again, there were 19 children. Addington Bear said, quote, "We are therefore justified in believing that in this case, like so many others of its kind, the fallibility of human memory has played an overwhelming part in exaggerating the experiences actually undergone." He even went on to suggest that Hetty had produced the phenomena fraudulently. How rude! Who would ever do something like that? Certainly not the girls at the Enfield haunting. But anyways, I like this book quite a lot. On the Noisy Ghost page, it says that skeptics point out how easy it is to fake poltergeist disturbances, and how physical evidence can be misinterpreted. And the example they bring up to support this is about a museum in Manchester that had an Egyptian statuette that was seen to rotate inside of a sealed glass case. As is tradition, of course, people immediately said that this was some kind of ancient curse and now it's going to rain locusts. However, Sir Brian Cox came in and said, quote, "Are you people just taking the piss or something? The statue is obviously rotating because of differential friction. Vibrations are making it turn. Now please, leave me the fuck alone. I've got particles to smash at the Large Hadron Collider." That may not be an actual quote, but he did say something like that. So after that, another expert was sent in because Brian was probably too busy doing things that actually matter, and this expert put a 3-axis vibration center under the cabinet and found, quote, "a peak vibration level coinciding with the movement from passers-by and traffic from the very busy Oxford Road nearby. This statue has a convex base. There's a lump at the bottom which makes it more susceptible to vibrations than the others which have a flat base. This is conclusive." So as you can see, it's quite easy to misunderstand things, which is fine. We are not all experts like Sir Brian Cox. By the way, if this is your first Mystorian video, I give people I like the pap of approval. It's the ultimate sign of respect. And thereafter I refer to them by Sir or Lady. And yes, I know it should be Dame, but I really don't like that for some reason that I don't understand. So because I don't understand it, I'll just blame that error on ghosts. Also, if this is your first Mystorian video, sorry about all the swearing. I am an ex-sailor. It's just part of the Davy Jones curse. Could have been worse. I could have had a fucking starfish stuck to my head. But speaking of sailors, this book also very briefly mentions a story about a poltergeist case from the 1850s, where the captain of the HMS Asp claims that he lost many of his crew members due to the actions of a poltergeist.
I said, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right.
Did one of them finally start throwing fucking knives? How have I never heard about this before? Sadly, it wasn't throwing knives. I don't know why I said sadly, that's obviously good. But I don't know, this is a really weird and unknown story. So I couldn't really find any expert opinions on it. So like Thanos, I had to do it myself. And to be honest, it was really easy to debunk. Because ghost stories are almost always filled with inaccuracies, and if you know anything about the maritime world, you know that they love paperwork like how P. Diddy loves baby oil. Like how the Mystorian loves shoving in irrelevant wrestling memes into his videos. Like how Greg Phillips loves Waffle House. Don't worry, I'll explain that one in a bit. Anyways, because the maritime world is filled with records and paperwork and documents and shit like that, it makes it really easy to go back and verify that the ship was built and bought when they say it was. It makes it really easy to verify that the ship was where they say it was. And in some cases, makes it really easy to verify that it was captained by who they say it was. So just a little tip to you, if you're ever planning on making a fake ghost story, just don't do it with ships. Unless you don't give a fuck about being debunked. In which case, do whatever you like then. The world is your oyster. So the story goes that the HMS Asp had been haunted regularly between 1850 and 1857. According to the website Pembrokeshire Online, the HMS Asp was a small survey vessel purchased by the Navy in 1850 and was based at the Pembroke Royal Navy dockyard. Before it was purchased, the paddle steamer had been used as a small cargo and passenger vessel plying back and forth between Britain and Ireland. And prior to the vessel beginning preparation for its new role, the dockyard superintendent approached the captain, informing him that the ship was haunted and that he might find it difficult to locate men willing to undertake the repair and refitting work. The captain, named Captain Eldridge, said, quote,
"Oh, you just taking the piss, bruv? Do the bloody job, will ya?"
Firstly, I don't know if that was a real quote. Secondly, this captain was apparently a guy named Captain George Manley Eldridge. And thirdly, I'm not actually entirely convinced that that was his real name, because I only found the name Captain George Manley Eldridge in one source of this story. All of the others just referred to him as Captain Eldridge. Anyway, contrary to what the superintendent said, there was no issue finding people to refit the ship, and while the ship was being refitted, nothing spooky happened. Which again is weird, because according to traditional ghost lore, this usually pisses the spirits off and then they start tangling your wires and rotating your Egyptian statues and whatever. But only once the ship entered the waters again did anything strange start happening. And at first, the hauntings were just inexplicable bangs and loud noises that came from an empty aft cabin. Now, apparently, this aft cabin was only accessible by going through the companionway, which passed the captain's own cabin. A companionway, by the way, is the main entrance on a ship or boat that leads from the upper deck down into the cabin or interior space. So anyway, the captain could see that this aft cabin was empty, but still heard shit happening inside of it. But at this point, the captain was still skeptical. His crew, however, were beginning to get quite concerned about this. And I'm sure they had a good reason to be concerned, because it could not have possibly been just noises and shit from the ship rocking back and forth on the water and the boat creaking and things bumping into each other. It had to have been old Jeffrey. Now, apparently,
I've never been on live television before.
Yeah, I know, I'm saying it a lot again. Supposedly, on one occasion after the Asp docked in an unnamed Irish port, as is of course tradition, and the captain went ashore for a while, and when he returned, he came back and heard strange banging noises again, but this time coming from his own cabin. At this point, the captain was pissed. He thought for sure that he was about to catch the mamagaya making all the noise and was about to give him banana. But when he opened the door to see what in the blue hell was happening, he found his cabin empty. Just shortly after this happened, he heard a kerfuffle in the companionway and turned around to see his quartermaster there shouting about a woman that they had seen standing on top of their paddle box with her hand raised to the sky. Now, the brave sailor that they had stationed up there as a lookout was so scared that he had gone into convulsions. At this point, the captain was pissed. He was so pissed that he took the remainder of the watch himself, determined to get to the bottom of whatever was happening. According to Pembrokeshire Online, the remainder of the trip passed uneventfully, except for the continuing sounds coming from that empty aft cabin. The Asp eventually arrived back in her home port of Pembroke Dock and was soon laying peacefully at anchor in the Milford Haven waterway at Loranie. It was a Sunday afternoon and all seemed quiet. Suddenly, the peace was shattered as the ship's steward rushed up to the captain in a state of extreme agitation. He said that he had been spoken to by a mysterious disembodied voice and was now so terrified that the captain was forced to release the man ashore to recover. Supposedly, One by one, the other members of the crew began to come forward with their own accounts, some of them even requesting to be transferred to other ships. In time, the Asp became a ship that nobody wanted to work on, and no one stayed on for long before requesting a transfer. The only tough son of a bitch that stayed there was Captain Eldridge Horror. Eldridge. USS Eldridge. Eldridge Horror. Captain Eldridge. I'm starting to detect a pattern here. But it could just be the same kind of coincidence like when people see Jesus in a piece of toast. Anyways, Captain Eldridge would go on to claim that he was often awoken by lockers slamming, cold invisible hands being placed on his forehead, and loud banging noises coming from that motherfucking empty aft cabin. Then at some point in 1857, the HMS Asp returned to the dockyard at Pembroke for another refit and routine repair work. Now apparently, as the ship was docked there, one of the dockyard sentries reported the figure of a woman climbing up onto the paddle box with one of her arms raised towards the sky. As he watched her, she turned around and started approaching him. It says here that he then challenged her, but she came towards him so relentlessly until she passed straight through his outstretched musket. Quote, the brave sentry dropped his musket and fled to the guardhouse. As he bravely ran away, screaming bravely like a brave little child, he bravely called to a second sentry, who apparently also saw the woman for himself. The second sentry then bravely shot her, even though it doesn't really seem like she was doing anything, but the bullet had no effect on her. Too bad they didn't have a big bag of fucking salt or something, because that would have probably worked. According, of course, to traditional ghost lore. Anyways, a third sentry then heard the gunshot and then rushed over just in time to also witness the woman. As all three of these guys stood bravely together, they watched her enter the old Pater churchyard. She then supposedly paused for a moment, remained motionless above one of the gravestones. I assume that she was probably looking for a cup of water to bump over there so she could let us all know that she was now leaving the building. But after finding no cups of water on the gravestones, she just decided fuck it and disappeared. After that, there was no more poltergeist activity reported on the HMS Asp. Now, a little while after this, Captain Eldridge Horror decided to try to find an explanation for all of this. And apparently, he only ever found clues as to the identity of the ghost. Years before he took over the command of the Asp, the vessel was called Fury and traveled as a packet steamer across the Irish Sea. One day, the body of a beautiful young woman, her throat slit, had been discovered by a stewardess whilst cleaning the woman's sleeping berths after the ship landed in Ireland. Neither her identity nor that of her killers were ever verified. Now that is amazing. Not the part where the woman was killed, obviously, the fact that the vessel was previously known as the Fury, because we now know that this ship here is the correct one. It is quite fucking clear that it was not bought in 1850, but was transferred from the post office to the Royal Navy in 1837. 13 long-ass boring years before 1850. And according to this website, which has a record of all the post office steam packets from this time, we now have even more confirmation that this is the correct ship. The Fury became the Asp. Now, ladies and gentlemen, because it is often said that the truth is stranger than fiction, allow me to bore you to death with the actual truth about the HMS Asp. Please don't come back and haunt me. I don't have any Egyptian statues for you to rotate. Now, back in the 1820s, mail had been carried across the sea by steam packers. This may sound very unusual and primitive because today we have satellites and email, but back then their understanding of the world wasn't as advanced as ours is today. But let's get back to the steam packers. Now, these things didn't only carry mail, it was also possible for passengers to come aboard these things and travel. By 1837, the UK Post Office owned 26 wooden paddle steamers. These vessels were referred to as His Majesty's Post Office packet steamers, and they were not registered like the conventional commercial vessels, and they were independent of the Royal Navy. This situation changed, however, in 1837, when, because of the perceived inefficiency and large cost of them, post office steamers were assigned to the Admiralty, the Royal Navy, and renamed. The majority of them, though, continued to ply the same routes, with departure timings still determined by the post office. So what does this all mean to us? Well, 1837 is about the time that the Fury was renamed to the HMS Asp, and I suppose due to its name and its connection to the Royal Navy, this story kinda comes with the preconceived notion that the ship may have actually been a warship or some shit like that. However, after being renamed to the HMS Asp, it still continued to ferry mail and passengers on the Port Patrick route until 1849. Now, it's hard to say for sure what the ship was doing for the next couple of years, which is possibly the reason that the story exists in the first place, but it is clear that it was not bought by the Navy in 1850. It technically already belonged to them. It would also not have been refitted for its new role in the Navy because it just continued to do what it was already doing, delivering mail. It is also unlikely that Captain Aldrich ever docked a ship at an Irish port because Captain Aldrich does not seem to exist. In this ship's history, there is no mention of a captain by this name. There's only 2 lieutenant commanders named William Henry and William Walter Oak. Furthermore, in the Naval Biographical Dictionary, there are only 2 lieutenants with the surname Aldrich, but neither of them commanded the HMS Asp, and neither of them worked for the Royal Navy beyond 1844. Nor are there any reports at all about a woman being found murdered on the Fury. And as one more thing to mention here, in 1855, the Asp was reassigned to be a tender boat for the HMS Fishguard, and only then did the ship stay at the Pembroke Royal Navy dockyards. So let me ask, if the ship was there at the Pembroke Royal Navy dockyards all the time from 1855, working as a tender boat, and this story concludes with the ghost finally finding its way home or whatever in 1857 by walking up to a gravestone in the old Pater churchyard in the Pembroke Royal Navy dockyards, why in the blue hell did it take the ghost so long? It had 2 long-ass boring years to do that. Tender boats typically stay at the port that they're assigned to and serve as ferries between the larger vessels that cannot dock alongside the port without grounding themselves. So what made this ghost just suddenly decide one day, somebody find me a cup of water because I am done with this place? Perhaps the ghost was just tired of all the stupid fucking stories people come up with. Anyway, this was sad because I thought for sure that this story with the HMS Asp was going to be the one that finally proved poltergeists were real.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Moving on to our final silly ghost story that my new favorite book brings up, The Bell Witch Haunting. Now this story has been called America's best known poltergeist case, and is probably the biggest load of bullshit I have ever heard in my life. So I thought it would be a good idea to play my favorite game with this one, Phenomenasons, because I think we're gonna see a new high score today. As it stands, Ed and Lorraine Warren are the World Heavyweight Phenomenasons champions with a score of 101. But honestly though, I just kinda gave up at 101. They could probably easily reach a score in the fucking millions. But the only difference is, that is a combined score from multiple different stories. So just for shits and giggles, let's see how the Bell Witch Haunting does on its own. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna cover the story as it's presented first. And then we are going to fucking destroy it. And just in case you're wondering, yes, I do have a grudge against this story. And that'll be very obvious when we get there. Well then, it is time for the biggest load of bullshit you have ever heard. So the story starts in about 1804, when a guy named John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to the Red River Bottomland in Robertson County, Tennessee. John Bell, his wife Lucy Bell, and their 6 children then settled in the Red River community, which you may know better by what it's known as today, Adams, Tennessee. John then purchased some land and a large house for his family, and over the next few years, he acquired even more land, in total about 328 acres. He then started clearing out his fields so he could plant some crops. Now apparently things were going very well. John and his wife Lucy were happy, they were successful, they had 3 more children after settling in Tennessee, and John even became an elder of the Red River Baptist Church. But as is of course tradition, John was about to fuck all of that up. Apparently, the hauntings of the Bell family began sometime in 1817, when John Bell was out in his cornfields one day and came across a strange-looking animal. Something the size of a large dog with the head of a rabbit. How frightening. And this thing was just sitting there in the cornfields, minding its own fucking business, when John Bell felt the impulse to kill it. So he raised up his gun, he aimed it at the creature, and as he fired, the creature just disappeared. Poof. Poof. Now, John just saw an animal disappear before his very eyes. Something that animals cannot do. However, he just said fuck it and carried on doing whatever he was doing. Because according to the story, he just thought nothing more of it. I don't know, maybe he just thought he was hallucinating because he was suffering from ergot poisoning or something. But he thought nothing more of this animal disappearing. Well, at least until dinner time later that very same night, when the family began to start hearing weird beating sounds on the outside walls of their house. Now, these mysterious sounds continued with increased frequency and force each night. And every time they heard it, John and his sons would rush outside to catch whoever was doing this. But there was never anybody there. In South Africa, we call this game Tok Toki. In America, you guys call it Ding Dong Ditch. But nobody in the entire world calls it paranormal activity. Unfortunately though, it doesn't seem like John was suffering hallucinations from ergot poisoning, because over the next few weeks, his children would also see weird shit. Wait, hold on. No, wait, so maybe it was ergot poisoning then. It would make sense because they were farmers. I don't know, whatever. Apparently, John's son Drew said that he saw an unknown bird of extraordinary size perched on a fence, and when he approached it, it just flew away. How frightening. A bird that flew away. And then John's daughter Betsy said that she saw a girl in a green dress swinging from the limb of an oak tree by her neck. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the first of many times that Betsy would take things just a little too far. Finally then, John Bell's slave. John Bell's slave. Yeah, a man named Dean, who, quote, belonged to the Bell family, reported being followed by a large black dog on evenings that he went to visit his wife. He didn't think to report, though, that this dog had 2 heads. That information you can only get from this drawing. Also, I don't care if it was normal back then to have slaves. I'm saying it again, and I'm gonna say that I'm glad a poltergeist came to slap these motherfuckers. Pretty soon after all of this, the paranormal activity decided to move inside the Bell house, and the children now began waking up frightened, complaining that rats were gnawing at their bedposts. How frightening. Okay, well, rats spread disease, whatever. Not long after that, the children began complaining that their bed covers were pulled from them and their pillows were tossed onto the floor by a seemingly invisible entity. That happens to me literally every single night though. I do it to myself in my sleep. So anyway, this is pretty classic poltergeist shit so far. Random noises that could be fucking anything and minor inconveniences, like your pillows ending up on the floor. But eventually, the family would even start hearing invisible dogs fighting. How weird! I also hear that every single day where I live. I think you can even hear my neighbor's dogs in some of my videos, even though I try to drown them out with background music. But sure, invisible dogs, why not add them to the list? And the Bells would even apparently hear chains rattling along their floorboards. Perhaps their guilt about owning slaves was manifesting through their ergot hallucinations. I don't know. But around about this same time, John Bell began experiencing paralysis in his mouth.
I said, hold up, wait a minute.
Could this have actually been ergot poisoning? Assuming any of this actually happened, of course. So ergot poisoning, or ergotism, comes from eating grains or grain products contaminated with the Claviceps purpurea fungus. And it can lead to severe neurological symptoms that include paralysis and numbness, which can affect the mouth and tongue. Now, interestingly, it also causes mania and psychosis. Even more interestingly, there is a theory that the very same shit may have been the cause of the very real Salem witch trials. However, this theory has been disputed because the symptoms would have been more widespread rather than concentrated on specific individuals. So, because, according to the story, the entire Bell family, all their neighbors, and even people who came from far away to see the Bell Witch all experienced this, perhaps it was ergotism. Now, that is just a thought, and I have nothing to back that up, and that also assumes that the story even happened the way it is told. But I'm not convinced that any of this actually happened. I just wanted it to be known that I tried finding a rational explanation before I just called it a huge steaming pile of Triceratops shit. Because we're about to go from typical poltergeist activity to something that would have been too goofy even for an episode of Supernatural.
Look how big my mouth is.
Now, as time went on, the Bells began hearing faint, whispering voices, which were too weak to understand, but sounded like an old woman singing hymns. At this point, John Bell did what every dad or husband does in every horror movie ever, told his family that nothing weird was happening and that they mustn't tell anyone. Cause God forbid someone actually comes in to help them exorcise this fucking demon or something. But it would seem that John Bell's plan of keeping quiet about this thing didn't actually help at all, because the entity would then start physically attacking the children. It apparently pulled their hair and scratched them. And for some unknown reason, this entity also had a particular fascination with Betsy, who was slapped repeatedly and slapped so hard it left handprints on her. Oh, and one more thing. She was also stuck with pins. Isn't she fucking lucky she wasn't stuck with knives? The story also claims that the entity would even throw objects at Betsy. Isn't she fucking lucky she wasn't thrown with knives? John Bell then did what every man does in every scenario ever and ignored his own advice. He then went over to his friend and neighbor James Johnston to tell him the story of our family trouble. James then did what every dad or husband does in every horror movie ever and told John that nothing weird was happening and that he was full of shit. And he told John that he was so full of shit that he would prove it to him by staying the night at his house. So James then told his wife, "Hey honey, we're gonna go ghost hunting tonight. Doesn't that sound fun?" His wife probably said no, but she went with him anyway. That night at the Bell house, things started off fine. The Bell Witch must have just been waiting for the ergot poisoning to kick in, because as soon as James and his wife went to bed, shit hit the fan. Their bed covers got pulled off, and James got slapped. But not hard enough it seems, because he just went back to sleep and stayed the rest of the night. I'm wondering if it was his wife that slapped him. But in his defense, James did ask the entity what it wanted after he got slapped, but since it never answered, he just thought, fuck it, this bed is too comfy to get up and leave now. In the morning though, the story is so fucking dumb. In the morning though, he told John that this was most likely an evil spirit, the kind the Bible talks about, but not evil enough to scare him out of bed and leave the house. It seems then that news about the haunting got out and spread like ergot poisoning, because soon people would travel from all over to see this shit for themselves. Now, while these random unnamed extras in the story were there, they would ask the Bell Witch questions, which it was now somehow able to answer. Amazing! This fucking ghost just unlocked the ability to speak. That doesn't happen anymore. Well, at least according to these paranormal YouTube channels that always have some sort of paranormal paraphernalia with them. Nowadays, you need a fucking arsenal. You need a spirit box, an EMF detector, EVP recorder, cat ball, dowsing rod, pendulum, REM pod, laser grid pen, candle, Ouija board, pencils wrapped in toilet paper, Photoshop, or a fucking Xbox Connect. And at the end of the day, none of that shit even fucking works, and they have to fake the paranormal activity. I wonder why that is. But let's get back on track. Now, people would come and ask, who are you and what do you want? And the Bell Witch would say, I am a spirit, I was once very happy, but have been disturbed. And apparently at one point, it even supposedly identified itself. It claimed to be old Kate Batts' witch. And according to some reports, just straight up said that its name was Kate. How frightening. But anyway, because it said its name was Kate, people then continued to call it Kate. And apparently it liked this name and responded favorably to it. Also apparently, it would shake hands with people, which may just be the weirdest thing I have ever heard in a ghost story. But before we move on, I just want to make something very clear about Kate Batts. According to Joshua Mark on worldhistory.org, in some versions of the legend, before all this shit started, it is said that John Bell had an altercation with a neighbor named Kate Batts, who claimed that he had cheated her on a land deal. Now, Kate Batts was regarded as a witch by the people of the community because she was often mocked for using some words wrong, and sometimes she was just a bit strange. So, as is of course tradition, that meant that she was a witch. And therefore, some versions of the story claim that Kate Batts put a curse on John Bell.
You are cursed!
May I just ask a serious question quickly? If everybody was a dick to this woman, why did she not curse anybody else? Surely there would have been a whole lot more shit going on in the Red River community if she really was a witch. Yeah, well, what the fuck do I know? Now, interestingly, research has proven that Kate Batts was actually a real person, and she wasn't just some random neighbor, she was actually related to John Bell. Kate Batts was Lucy Bell's niece. Now, does that mean that because she was related to him, she wouldn't have cursed John? No, she wouldn't have cursed John because that is impossible, unless you're Danhausen. But how some versions of the story get around that problem is by saying Kate died and it was her ghost that was haunting the Bells. The problem with this claim, though, is that since Kate Batts was actually a real person, it makes it real easy to verify that she actually outlived both John and Lucy. So then, why the fuck did the entity say its name was Kate then? Because it probably didn't. So the way people get around that problem now is by saying that Kate must have just cursed them because of that land deal, even though that is impossible. And this time, it's not impossible because cursing people is impossible. It's impossible because Kate Batts never had a fight with John Bell over land. According to the Bell Witch website, actual records and details can be found in the minutes of the Red River Baptist Church that John Bell was an elder of that clearly show that John Bell had a well-documented dispute with Benjamin Batts over the sale of a slave. Here is where the confusion comes in. Despite having the same last name, Benjamin and Kate Batts were not closely related. Kinda like Mariah Carey and Drew Carey. As for this land dispute though, John Bell had a small kerfuffle over land with a guy named Josiah Fort in about 1816. This dispute is also listed in the Red River Baptist Church minutes, however, somebody marked through the specific details in the original minute book. Therefore, people seem to have confused these two things together and mixed up John's dispute with Benjamin Batts over a slave with John's kerfuffle with Josiah Fort over land. And now, Kate Batts is the Bell Witch. Do this. Anyways, where were we? So people came and spoke to the Bell Witch, it said its name was Kate, and now with its new power to speak in full conversation, the first thing it did with this power was insult people and become incredibly racist. Just take a look at this drawing. This comes from the book, An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch. This book, by the way, is the earliest known source of the Bell Witch story, and in it, it shows a drawing of Dean, who was turned into a mule by the witch.
What makes you think she's... Well, she turned me into a newt! A newt? Got better.
Now, the witch didn't only turn Dean into a mule and turn him back into a human again for no reason in particular, but it also vomited out racial slurs to him and Bell's other slaves. What a piece of shit. The Bell Witch was pretty shit too. Dean apparently admitted that soon after these encounters, he began carrying around a witch ball, and this was given to him by his wife to protect him from harm. A good question to ask is, did it work? Fuck knows. If it was that easy though, this would have been a much shorter story. Just have everyone in the Red River community carry around a witch ball. Eventually though, the Bell Witch told everyone its origin story, and it said something about a Native American burial ground on Bell's property that was disturbed. Well, I cannot find any evidence if there was or wasn't a Native American burial mound on Bell's property that was disturbed, but I'm pretty sure plenty of them have been disturbed in real life. So you'd think that there would be more Bell Witches everywhere. And I don't mean like Ed and Lorraine Warren's Just Trust Me Bro stories, or those fucking videos you see in a Nuke's Top 5 compilation. I want to be able to go somewhere and shake hands with a ghost. But whatever. Now that the Bell Witch was able to speak, it wasn't only full of shit and racist, it also gained the ability to lie. Lying, a uniquely human trait. Now, it would tell people things about the future that would not come true. It apparently knew intimate things about other families, even though these claims are not exactly described in any further detail, and when they are so fucking pathetic, it's actually hilarious. For example, an Englishman came to see the Bell Witch, and it mocked his accent, proving that it knew that he was from England. Wow! Conclusive proof that ghosts are real. In another example, the Bell Witch revealed secrets about the Bell family that nobody else could have known. This is probably because Betsy Bell was the Bell Witch. And in the only example that baffled me for approximately 3 seconds, is that the son of the neighbor James Johnston, the guy who did not get slapped hard enough, came over and asked the witch what his Dutch step-grandmother in North Carolina said when one of her slaves would do something wrong. Using the woman's own voice and accent, Kate replied, "Hut tut, what has happened now?" Hut tut is a Dutch term meaning no no. Well, there it is. Proof.
I suppose you go along and then suddenly...
Proof. Now this kid's name was John Johnston, and he's about the only character in the story that isn't a fucking idiot. According to the Bell Witch site, one of the most significant things that John learned about Kate was that she could not fully read minds, as she had led some to believe. He often asked her what he was thinking, but she was never able to give the right answer, sometimes close, but never correct. During one of their lengthy discussions at his brother's home, Kate became angry with Johnston and threatened to kill him. On his way home the following morning, he noticed what looked like the shadow of a long sharp knife following behind him. Holy shit, is it actually about to happen? Is someone finally about to get stabbed by a poltergeist? According to the story, John then thought to himself, if the Lord wants me to die, then I will die. I will not run. He stood still in his tracks to see what fate would deal him. The knife never disappeared, and after taking some time to analyze his surroundings, he realized that the knife was actually the shadow of a blade from a cornstalk. Blade from a cornstalk blowing in the wind. After this incident, John Johnston hypothesized that many so-called encounters with Kate had very logical origins, just like his cornblade, but most people just ran away frightened and never took the time to carefully observe their surroundings. Well, isn't that funny? Story debunks itself. Well, I do feel compelled to finish it though. So, other than being racist, full of shit, not able to predict the future, not able to read minds, not even able to stab people with knives, and probably just knew that John's grandmother said hut tut because John Johnston told Betsy or somebody in the Bell family that before he asked that question. But despite its complete incompetence, the Bell Witch did, however, seem to have the ability to travel enormous distances in seconds, or at least be in two places at the same time. Because apparently, according to the story, the Bell Witch was able to recite the words to 2 sermons preached at the same time, 13 miles apart. How impressive! Well, it would be if they had a way to prove it. But I'm not really sure how they verified that. Not sure if the preachers back then wrote down their sermons word for word, and the people at Bell's house wrote down the witch's sermon word for word, and then they compared notes later. But who really gives a fuck anyway? Because this last claim is the most important one. Because one day, the Bell Witch just kinda gathered everybody around, and then told everybody that there is a treasure buried somewhere on the property. Apparently, an early immigrant had hidden his treasure for safekeeping. The Bell Witch was quite adamant about this treasure, and told everybody that they gotta go find that shit now, before the secret of this treasure gets out. Even though all the spectators in the house now heard the witch say this. Either way, everybody was like, fuck yeah, dude, treasure! We love treasure! This Bell Witch may be racist, but she ain't half bad after all. So everybody then asked the witch, where is this treasure? The Bell Witch then told them it's under a great stone near a spring at the southwest corner of the farm. A group of men then, including some of John Bell's kids, went out to look for this treasure. And apparently, yes, I know I'm saying it a lot, but for fuck's sake, what am I supposed to do? The story's a bunch of bullshit. Apparently, they found this great stone and they began digging. They eventually dug a hole that was 6 feet wide, 6 feet long, and almost 6 feet deep. But they didn't find no treasure. Angry, they went back to the witch and said, "Hey, what the fuck, witch? We didn't find no treasure out there." The Bell Witch then laughed at them and mocked them for being so easily fooled. What a great message that is. That may be the only smart thing the Bell Witch ever said. But in any case, just keep this 6-foot hole in mind. It will be important later. Then, in another strange incident, a family friend of the Bells named William Porter supposedly grabbed the Bell Witch somehow and attempted to throw her into the fireplace. However, he wasn't able to accomplish this because the massive weight and terrible odor were too much for him to bear. Okay, firstly, when the fuck did this thing begin to sting so bad that people couldn't go near it? People were shaking hands with it just fine a couple of days ago. And secondly, if people could now grab this thing, and it wasn't just some invisible force shaking hands with people, why didn't William Porter call for help? Why wasn't this tried again? The story says that there were literally hundreds of people coming to the Bell House to see the witch. This story just insults our intelligence by thinking that we won't ask any questions. Then, in about 1819, so like 2-ish years after all of this shit started, word of the Bell Witch haunting reached General Andrew Jackson, who, if you know your American history, he became the 7th President of America in 1829, and also is not closely related to Samuel L. Jackson. Just thought I should clarify that, since some people assume that people who share the same surname are always closely related. Now, supposedly, General A. Jackson was said to be acquainted with the Bell family since John Jr. and his brothers, Jesse and Drury, had fought under his command at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. So, according to the story, General A. Jackson decided to pay the Bell farm a visit to investigate these claims for himself. As General A. Jackson's entourage, which consisted of several men, well-groomed horses and a large wagon, approached the Bell property, the wagon jolted to a sudden stop. For some mystifying reason, it had become stuck in a muddy creek bed, and these well-groomed horses weren't able to pull it out. At least, that is what the men thought. After several minutes of General A. Jackson swearing, probably saying, "I've had it with these motherfucking horses and this motherfucking creek bed," General A. Jackson couldn't coax the horses into pulling the wagon out the creek bed, when all of a sudden, General A. Jackson proclaimed, "By the eternal boys, that must be the motherfucking Bell Witch." Not an actual quote, also not a real story. Then suddenly, a disembodied female voice told Jackson that they could proceed and that she would see them again later that evening. The wagon then suddenly freed itself, and then they were finally able to make their way up to the Bell House. That evening, General A. Jackson told war stories while his entourage set up their tents in John and Lucy Bell's yard. Now, I'm sure everyone in the Bell House was so invested in General A. Jackson's stories that they just kind of forgot for a moment what the fuck they were even there for. Because the Bell Witch did nothing. Nothing happened for several hours. So either the Bell Witch was just loving the stories and forgot to slap people, or Betsy wasn't sure if she would get away with it again, or they were all just waiting for the ergot poisoning to kick in. Who knows? However, at some point in the night, one of General A. Jackson's guys, who claimed to be a witch tamer, pulled out a gun and said that it's loaded with a special silver bullet that will kill any spirit that it comes into contact with. He then claimed that the reason nothing has happened so far is because the Bell Witch knows about the silver bullet and was scared of it. Just as soon as this man said this, he began screaming and getting pulled around in all different directions, shouting that he was getting stuck with pins. Well, isn't he just fucking lucky that he wasn't stuck with knives? I realize it's getting old, but I'm trying to make a fucking point here. All of a sudden, the Bell Witch threw this man out of the house. Isn't he lucky he wasn't thrown with knives? Yes, yes, yes. The witch then said out loud to everybody that there was another fraud in Jackson's party and that it would identify them the following evening. Why not now? Who knows? Jackson's men then begged him to leave the Bell farm, but he said no because he wanted to know who the fraud was. So they then decided to try to go outside and get some sleep in their tents, but were just so fucking scared of getting stuck with pins that they kept going back to Jackson asking him to leave, but Jackson just kept saying no. And to be honest, this is like the one part in the story that I'm actually excited to read about, Because here you have the army, you have the future president of America, and you have a witch tamer with a silver bullet that can kill anything. So I'm kind of half expecting like a big showdown here. But shockingly, there is no more information about what happens next. However, at an unspecified time early the next morning, General A. Jackson and his entourage were spotted in Springfield, Tennessee, about 12 miles away from the Bell House, and they were supposedly heading back to Nashville. Whatever it was that made General A. Jackson agree to leave the farm will forever be a mystery. However, he did apparently tell onlookers that he would, quote, rather fight the British at New Orleans than fight the Bell Witch. Because, as we all know, bullets deal far less damage than pins. So pretty soon after all this bullshit, John Bell began experiencing episodes of twitching in his face and difficulty swallowing. And this just got worse and worse over the course of the next year. By about September of 1820, John Bell was in such bad health that he was confined to his home. The Bell Witch, however, didn't give a fuck that this man was sick and continued to slap the shit out of him even after he just recovered from seizures. And when he was able to get up and walk, the Bell Witch would pluck off his shoes one step at a time. And I mean, if that's not bad enough, it also just threatened to kill him repeatedly. But despite being such a dick to John Bell, the Bell Witch was really respectful to Lucy Bell. It even called her the most perfect woman to ever walk the earth. And it would even give her fresh fruit and sing for her. Now may I just ask a very serious question again? What in the blue flaming fucking hell is going on here? Why wasn't the Bell Witch nice to Dean? What the fuck did Dean do? Why did turn him into a mule and then shake hands with some other random people and then stick pins into others? And if this ghost hated the Bell family so much, why did it give Lucy fruit? Why did it sing for her? Why did it stink? I don't understand. What the fuck is happening in this story? Oh my god, man. Anyways, at some uncertain point in time, could have been around now, could have been way before, I don't know, and I don't give a shit anymore. But Betsy got engaged to a guy named Joshua Gardner. Everybody seemed to like this guy, except for 3 people. The Bell Witch, Betsy's school teacher Richard Powell, and Betsy herself apparently. Even more bizarrely, despite constantly torturing Betsy over the years, the Bell Witch seemed to have her best interests at heart when it came to her engagement with Joshua Gardner. Because the Bell Witch would claim, for no fucking reason in particular one day, you will not have happiness with Joshua Gardner, and future generations will see it true. Now, before we continue, I just want to point out that Joshua Gardner would go on to become a very successful farmer and served as a magistrate for several years near the present-day town of Paris, Tennessee. And some reports suggest that he ended up acquiring like 1,800 acres of land. So this dude was fucking loaded. So I'm not exactly sure what the Bell Witch foresaw that made her hate this guy so much. But hey, like they say, money can't buy happiness. But I'd rather cry in a mansion. Well, I've also said before that I like smaller homes because I fucking hate cleaning. And that's my excuse, and I'm sticking with it. But to me, it seems quite obvious that Betsy had a thing for her school teacher Richard Powell. Since this guy taught many of John and Lucy's kids, he became friends with them and soon developed, Jesus fucking Christ, developed a strong fondness for Betsy as she matured into adolescence. I was gonna say how times have changed, but apparently not. But despite Richard's frequent visits to the Bell home and the compliments he often paid her, Betsy was already courting Joshua Gardner, a well-respected and close neighbor whose age was much closer to hers. Both families were pleased with the courtship, however, it seemed that neither Richard Powell nor the Bell Witch shared their enthusiasm. Now, we gotta keep going chronologically here, but just remember Richard Powell's name. He will come up again soon. So, after years of tormenting John and Betsy Bell, and after repeatedly threatening to kill John Bell would die on December 20th, 1820. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this next part is the reason that the story is getting an extra 100 sins. Immediately after his death, his family found a vial of strange black liquid in the cupboard. John Jr. then sprinkled 2 drops on the cat's tongue. The cat jumped up into the air, rolled over, and was dead when it hit the floor.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
The story should consider itself lucky right now that I didn't add 1,000 sins, but also There doesn't seem to be any known poison that can kill a cat that quickly. So at least we know it's bullshit. Now, apparently after this happened, the Bell Witch said out loud, quote, "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him." John Jr. then, in his infinite wisdom, tossed the mysterious vial into the fireplace instead of, keeping it for evidence. It then burst into a bright blue flame and shot up the chimney. Now, according to the story, John's funeral was one of the biggest ones ever held in Robertson County. People are said to have attended from miles away. 3 preachers came to his eulogy, and the funeral was even attended by the Bell Witch herself. Apparently, as the crowd began leaving the graveyard, the Bell Witch began singing drinking songs, and she didn't stop until the very last person left the graveyard. Now, with regards to what it is exactly that killed John Bell, it doesn't really seem like anybody is sure. However, just reading off the Bell Witch website, Bell's later affliction was most likely a neurological disorder. Although Kate, the Bell Witch, vehemently claimed responsibility, very little is known about such disorders during those early days. It is interesting to note that Sir Charles Bell, a 19th century anatomy professor with no relation to John Bell, just thought I should clarify that since, people assume that people who share the same surnames are related, discovered a neurological disorder that yielded symptoms that were similar to those that John Bell suffered at the onset of his affliction. The affliction discovered by Sir Charles Bell became known as Bell's palsy, and has become yet another falsehood associated with the Bell Witch legend. Contrary to what some might say, John Bell's illness was not Bell's palsy. Now, I'm not a doctor, so don't take anything I'm about to say seriously, but I was taking the piss with ergot poisoning before, but the symptoms that John Bell was experiencing is quite similar to what you would experience if you were suffering from ergotism. Ergotism acts as a severe neurological disorder alongside its vascular effects. It causes convulsive ergotism, characterized by symptoms including hallucinations, mania, psychosis, delusions, tremors, and severe muscular spasms. It also includes numbness and paralysis. It also causes vascular constriction, which can lead to dry gangrene in the legs. So who knows? I'm just saying it makes sense. But the whole story is probably fake, so I suppose it's irrelevant. So anyways, after John's death, the Bell Witch just kinda stopped. For no reason whatsoever. The only person then that it would torment was Betsy, and the only thing it would torment Betsy about is trying to get her to break up with Joshua Gardner. That's pretty much it. But,
Why? Ow!
Please tell me if I'm going crazy or I've got ergot poisoning, and this actually makes sense. So the Bell Witch torments Betsy for years, it slaps her, it pulls her fucking bed sheets off, it sticks her with pins, but then doesn't want her to get married to a person that she would not find happiness with. Isn't that the fucking point here? Isn't the Bell Witch trying to ruin their lives? Well, what the fuck do I know? Betsy then went and broke up with Joshua. Her reasoning was quite simple. The Bell Witch had a strong aversion for her father, which ultimately led to his death, and the Bell Witch had an equally strong aversion to the engagement. It was likely that Joshua Gardner, the boy she loved, would suffer the same fate as her father. Betsy then went and married Richard Powell, her old school teacher.
You gotta be fucking kidding me. You addicted to drugs.
After that, the Bell Witch came and visited Betsy and the Bells one final time, and apparently asked them a favor. It asked, "May I please have a cup of water? 'Cause I'm over this and I'm out. But hey, we had some good times, so I'll come back in 7 years again to check in and to tell John Jr. about things that are not going to come true in the future." And according to Martin Ingram, the author of the authenticated history of the famous Bell Witch haunting, the Bell Witch did actually come back 7 years later to meet with John Jr. But sadly, none of her predictions would come true. If I'm not mistaken, and I don't really give a fuck anymore if I am, but one prediction that the Bell Witch made was when John Jr. would die. The Bell Witch said May 8th, 1862. And of course, writing these predictions retroactively are easy. You can just go look up the date that people died and say that's what the Bell Witch said. However, Bell Witch historian Tim Henson actually found the fucking receipt for John Jr.'s gravestone. And it proves definitively that the Bell Witch was wrong. because John Jr. actually died on April 8th, 1862, a whole month before. So it would seem that the Bell Witch only knew as much as the person who wrote the story knew. How shocking. Now we're at a rather dramatic 159 sins for this story. And the thing is, we've barely even started debunking it. But honestly, I don't even know how to debunk a story like this. It's just so airtight. It's too perfect a ghost story. So this is a bit above my pay grade and way beyond my comprehension. I think I need to get an expert's opinion on this one. And who better to call than the king of the skeptics, the guy they called the modern Sherlock Holmes. For a story like the Bell Witch haunting, we need to call in the big gun, the biggest gun, my hero, Joe. No, Joe Nickell. Joe Nickell. But in case you don't remember, Joe Nickell is the guy that told Ed Warren shit on live TV. I am incredibly jealous, but what you may not know is that Joe Nickell also worked for the CSI, the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. And much like Harry Houdini, the Amazing Randy, and Penn and Teller, Joe used to be a performing magician who then took his experience and his knowledge and changed his focus to expose charlatans and con artists. And he did this in an effort to promote science, reason, critical thinking, and secular humanism. Joe Nickell was the fucking man. And I'm gonna recommend that you read his Bell Witch article on the Skeptical Inquirer. It's linked in the description. I'm just gonna simplify it and quote a few pieces here and there, but you should definitely read it because Moses, did he destroy the story. Okay, so the first thing to note here is that Joe Nickell points out that this whole Bell Witch bullshit really comes from one source. And that source is Martin Ingram's book, an authenticated history of the famous Bell Witch haunting. Now, Martin released this pile of dog shit back in 1894, and he claimed that he got this true story from a manuscript or like a diary written by John Bell's son Richard in 1846. This manuscript or diary is known as the Bell Manuscript and has never been seen by anyone ever. So basically what this means is the earliest known account of the Bell Witch haunting is Martin Ingram's book. Now, just to avoid any confusion at all, this Bell manuscript is presented in Martin Ingram's book, and it's presented as if it's written by Richard Bell. But that's the problem. It isn't anywhere else. Where the fuck is the actual Bell manuscript? Nobody knows. So that means, again, the earliest known account of the Bell Witch haunting is Martin Ingram's book that he released in 1894. So that's not good. Anyway, let's refer back to the lost treasure that the Bell Witch sent people looking for. The Bell Witch said that there is a treasure under a great stone on the southwest corner of the farm. We gotta find that shit before the secret gets out. According to Joe Nickell, this is one of many seemingly small details that takes on a new significance when you view the story through the lens of Freemasonry. Now, I apologize if shit gets too complicated, but I have tried my best to kind of explain this as simply as possible without fucking it up. So, the mystic Arthur Edward Waite defined Masonry as a system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Waite says that in Masonic stories and rituals, the significance is in the allegory which may lie behind it. For example, Masonry's secret vault symbolism pertains to the grave, buried treasure, and lost secrets. Secrets that in the end remain lost. Now, much of Masonic symbolism is based on the stonemason's trade, and Masonic rituals focus on the death of Hiram, the master mason and architect of Solomon's Temple, whose allegorical grave measured 6 foot by 6 foot by 6 foot. The cube, of course, in Masonry being a symbol of truth. So, according to Joe Nickell, the Bell Witch treasure tale seems rife with Masonic symbolism. Firstly, this treasure is hidden under a great stone. That one kinda speaks for itself. Secondly, the group dug a 6 foot by 6 foot by almost 6 foot hole in the ground. Significantly here, this hole is not completed, indicating that they are still in pursuit of the truth. Thirdly, the location of the treasure was the southwest corner of the farm, which would correspond to the southwest corner of the Masonic Lodge. Basically, the symbolism here represents the Mason's journey in the search for the light, which is their ultimate goal, I suppose, knowledge and truth and all that shit. But the significance again is that this could be considered the halfway point, since new Masons technically begin their journey in the northeast corner. I hope this all makes sense so far. If not, just come along with me for the ride. It will be worth it in a bit. Joe Nickell then points out that Ingram makes a very peculiar claim, saying that at some point, John Bell has first one, then the other of his shoes pulled off, presumably by the Bell Witch. This is once again Masonic symbolism, specifically the Masonic rite of discalciation, the symbolic act of removing one's shoes or being unshoed upon entering a lodge. And this represents reverence, humility, and the recognition that the lodge is holy ground. As for the handshaking, this almost certainly refers to the Mason's secret handshake, and at one point in his constant beatings, John Bell says that he received a sudden jerk which raised me. This probably refers to the Masonic ceremony of being raised to Master Mason status, in which the candidate is suddenly jerked backward. Now there are plenty more examples like this, and again, I recommend that you read Joe Nickell's article. But ladies and gentlemen, today is a really special day, because we are moments away from witnessing Joe Nickell get raised to Master Mystorian status. Joe Nickell is about to finally receive his long overdue pap of approval. Joe Nickell said, "I find the parallels too many and too specific for coincidence. Moreover, there are additional apparent Masonic allusions in the portions of the story later penned by Martin Ingram, into which Bell's Our Family Trouble is sandwiched." Martin Ingram, by the way, was a long-standing Freemason who was buried in 1909 under Masonic auspices. Indeed, the evidence indicates that Ingram actually wrote the narrative attributed to Richard Bell. And there it is. That is why I believe in Sir Dr. Joe Nickell. Yeah, did you know that he was a doctor too? Sir Dr. Joe Nickell had a PhD in English, literature, and folklore. I didn't call Joe Nickell the biggest gun for nothing. This dude was the real fucking deal. Anyway, glazing aside, Joe goes on to hammer this point home. The alleged Bell manuscript has no proven existence before about 1891, which would be about the time that Martin Ingram began working on his authenticated whatever the fuck book. And as far as we know, the actual Bell manuscript is not available anywhere to be examined as to its paper, its ink, and its handwriting. It appears only as a text, and a text written by Martin Ingram. Now, Joe Nickell goes on to prove this by pointing out several examples, but my favorite one is the fact that Martin Ingram, Richard Bell, makes several references to private detectives, as in professional detectives and the detective business. Here's the thing though, if the Bell manuscript was really written in 1846, Richard Bell would not have a fucking clue what a private detective even was, because the first known use of that word in America was 1853. 7 long-ass boring years after 1846. Joe also goes on to point out that Martin Ingram and Richard Bell, who were two different writers supposedly, often used incredibly similar expressions. For example, they both describe John Bell in a very specific way. Richard Bell said that John was always four-handed, paid as he went, and Martin Ingram said that John paid as he went, he was always four-handed. Now fair enough, Martin Ingram may have just read that in the Bell manuscript and then just rewrote it backwards, but here is something that you cannot fucking argue. Even though Richard Bell was a farmer in the early 1800s, his manuscript is apparently filled with words that I'm sure most of us don't even know the fucking meaning of. Here's just a couple. Personation, declamation, vociferator. What the fuck does that mean? That sounds like a dinosaur. Beneficence and felicity. And when you compare these words to the type of words Ingram would use, like lodgment, unregenerated, indomitable, mordacity, and alacrity, it just seems to suggest that these words are coming from somebody who was a skilled or educated writer. Furthermore, it is quite peculiar that Richard Bell and Martin Ingram had the same habit of having sentences over 100 words long. In any case, Joe concludes by saying this: given all the similarities between the texts, in addition to other evidence, I have little hesitation in concluding that Ingram was the author of Bell. This, however, does not mean that the entire Bell Witch story is bogus, but it does warn that its central source may be largely fiction. Fair enough, let's keep ripping it to pieces then, because that cat thing really fucking pissed me off. Now, Martin Ingram, in his infinite wisdom, also cited an article published in the Saturday Evening Post, and this article was supposedly about the Bell Witch haunting. This article then would predate his book and help support his claims. However, just like the Richard Bell manuscript, nobody's been able to find this thing either, nor have people been able to find any records at all that General A. Jackson went to the Bell farm or even knew John Bell and his family personally. The Saturday Evening Post article and General A. Jackson could have been the saving grace for the story. That could have supported the idea that some shit happened at the Bell farm and it warranted their attention. But there's just no record of anything at all. Why this is weird is because General A. Jackson became the 7th President of America, and because he's a famous figure whose movements and activities are well documented, you'd expect to find some documents proving that he went to the Bell farm, but they just don't exist. Moses, 175 sins. I really don't think there's a story that'll ever beat this score, but fuck the story, it pissed me off, and now I'm out for blood. According to worldhistory.org, there isn't even a record of the hundreds of people who came to investigate the haunting. No evidence of the hundreds of people coming to the Bell home to ask the spirit questions, and probably saddest of all, no reports from the many people said to have attended John Bell's funeral that a disembodied spirit sang drinking songs towards the end of the service. You'd think that that would be something people remembered, but apparently not.
I have no memory of this place.
This is a pretty thorough debunking so far, but I've still got a few more nails to hammer deep into the coffin of America's best-known poltergeist case. According to Joe Nickell, in 2 chapters of Ingram's book titled Recollections and Testimonials, Martin Ingram presents the statements of numerous citizens whose statements authenticate the history of the Bell Witch. Unfortunately, many of those attesting, including 43 signers from Cedar Hill, are only stating that several men mentioned by Ingram were early settlers and trustworthy. Their collective statement makes no mention of the Bell Witch claims. But with that said, I feel like it would be dishonest of me not to mention that 11 people in Ingram's testimonials did claim to have heard stories about the Bell Witch directly from reliable people. Who are those reliable people? Fuck knows. But here's the people's names that said they heard about the Bell Witch. Let's publicly shame them. No, I'm just kidding. Let's not do that. Let's rather try to understand why this is. One of these guys, actually this guy here, John A. Gunn, even claimed to have seen the Bell manuscript, making him the only other person in the world other than Martin Ingram to have ever seen this thing. So the questions we have to ask ourselves is, are they lying? Are they mistaken? Are they suffering from ergot poisoning? Or is this proof that Betsy turned Dean into a mule? Well, Joe speculates that Ingram, who was a newspaperman by trade, possibly sent early or advanced copies of his book to the people that he was planning on soliciting testimonials from. And if that's the case, that could have influenced their memories. Joe Nickell says that it does seem unlikely that Ingram would have fabricated the testimonials of so many persons still living, or that they would have knowingly endorsed the deception. Fair enough, he's a smart man, I'm not gonna argue with him. But we've all heard about the Mandela effect. That shit happens all the time. To quote Addington Bear again, the fallibility of human memory has played an overwhelming part in exaggerating the experiences actually undergone. So it is therefore not impossible that the same thing happened here with the Bell Witch testimonial people. However, there is always the possibility that there is some sort of truth to the story. And before you unsubscribe, what I mean here is true in the same way that something happened at Enfield. And by something, I mean Janet Hodgson admitted to faking 2% of the poltergeist activity there. But hey, 2% to 100% makes no fucking difference to me.
You've now just confirmed in my mind you're not trustworthy, so fuck you.
Now, interestingly, Martin Ingram himself admits that many people suspected that Betsy was behind all of the poltergeist activity, and people even accused her of ventriloquism and trickery. Sounds very familiar. Now, according to bellwitch.org, this Saturday Evening Post article that Ingram cited that doesn't seem to exist is the thing that actually implicated Betsy. Apparently, this really pissed Betsy off, and she threatened legal action if the statements weren't retracted. A public apology and retraction then appeared in a later edition of the Saturday Evening Post, which also doesn't seem to exist. So you know what? Fuck this story. Let's wrap it up. As with other poltergeist cases, the Bell Witch story sounds suspiciously like an example of the poltergeist faking syndrome, in which someone, typically a child, causes the mischief. Very much like the case of the Enfield poltergeist, who Ed Warren, by the way, said was actually a demon. Too bad old Porkchop didn't have Eleazar's route, because The Conjuring 2 would have been a much shorter, much more bearable movie.